it's a bit like the ability to try before you buy. Renting gives you that flexibility. As a landlord, you have to have perhaps a little bit of patience. The landlord also doesn't want to be disturbed every 5 minutes just because a light bulb has gone.
Correct.
Or the agent that has sold him the property may be skewing a little bit the figures.
Hi everyone, this is Amit. In today's episode of Urban Habitat, I have a dear friend of mine, Mario, who's been in the real estate industry in UAE for last 16 years. Total experience in real estate around 40 years. He was based in UK previously. Currently, he's the head of brokerage team in Novi Properties. And today he's helping us understanding what are the basic things to keep in mind for a tenant or a landlord when they are either renting a property or they are taking a property on rent. Okay. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you very much, Amit.
Nice having you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mario, as you've been doing this for a long time, what I want to understand from you let's understand from a landlord perspective first. If I'm a landlord, what are the key things I need to keep in mind when I'm renting the first property that I buy?
Okay, so as a landlord, you have to have perhaps a little bit of patience because maybe the tenant is also renting for the first time.
Okay.
But you have to understand what are the parameters? What are my responsibilities as a landlord? And the first thing I would say is that ensure that the property is habitable, presentable.
Okay.
And it's always better that if you have it, nicely painted, cleaned, decorated. So you're giving it like a brand new. Because when the tenant eventually leaves, then they're supposed to give it back in the same manner that they've given it. So again, if you're giving it as is and it needs work, then the tenant can obviously give it to the landlord back as is. Other responsibilities for a landlord is that they have to be responsible for the maintenance of the property.
Okay.
Now there is some subtle differences there because there's a monetary value involved when it comes to maintenance.
Correct.
So blanket statement, the maintenance of a property is the responsibility of a landlord. However, the common practice is that anything, for example, under 500 dirhams would fall on the responsibility for the tenant to actually pay for it.
Okay.
And anything above 500 would be the responsibility of the landlord. The reason why it's over 500 is for things like major maintenance, boilers, water heaters, perhaps the air conditioning.
Okay.
If there's a little leak here or there, the tenant can obviously deal with that because invariably that should be under 500 dirhams.
Correct.
The other thing is as well, he will be taking a deposit, obviously, but it is the responsibility of the landlord at the end of the tenancy to give back the deposit in a timely manner.
Okay.
Less, of course, any... I'm not going to use words wear and tear because that's also quite subjective to an individual.
It's how they manage the property.
Exactly.
As well. Yeah.
But again, if you moved in freshly painted and cleaned and everything, you should just give it back. So for the deposit to be given back in its entirety, then the tenant would need to give the property back as it was given. So these would tend to be the responsibilities.
And there's a very thin line, as you said. It's 500 is just amount that we have in mind, but if it's something minor, he should not reach out to the landlord for every small petty thing. I'm sure that's the thought process.
100% yes, because obviously, like the tenant wants to have peace of mind and have what's known as quiet enjoyment of the property. Now that's a legal term.
Yeah.
The landlord also doesn't want to be disturbed every 5 minutes just because a light bulb has gone.
Correct.
Or so there has to be a little bit of give and take and some common sense as well.
It's on the sensibility of both the parties,
Correct.
how they want to approach and reach out to each other. For the landlord, how does he decide on the rental when he's renting it for the first time? What would you feel that either he goes to the RERA rental index and gets an idea? How do I define if I buy a house and I want to rent it?
No. The RERA rental calculator, for example, is only there for when you have an existing tenant.
Okay.
So it's important to note that there's the market rent and there's the RERA rent calculator rent, which takes the average. And that is why there's a big difference between a vacant property, therefore the market rent, the proper rent that you see on Dubizzle, Property Finder, Beirut, and of course when you have a tenant in situ, that's when the rental calculator is used.
Correct.
So my advice would be, I mean, look, I'm sure an owner has an idea of what he's looking to rent for, but the best thing to do is make a comparison either by speaking to your local real estate agent and asking a valuation, which actually in all my years here in real estate, nobody ever asks. It's always the landlord and the seller that tells you the price they want.
Correct.
So they already know. Whereas in the UK, when I was first working in the UK, you would give valuations based on your experience. But anyway, here, go on these portals, have a look at other properties that are vacant and what are they asking for.
Neighboring properties or similar properties. And I'm sure when a landlord buys a property for investment, he has that calculation in mind because that's what the purpose is. If he's buying for investment, he knows what is the rental he's looking at to derive his rate of return or investment return on the property, correct? So that's pretty
absolutely
much clear.
correct. And of course, at the point of buying the property, probably he's taken advice also from his agent and then done the due diligence of speaking to a few others because, there could be that the agent that has sold him the property may be skewing a little bit the figures just to show him what an amazing property it probably is. But do the due diligence and find out what they go for. Agents also have this tool that they can go to, Property Monitor, which is a B2B platform, which I'm sure you may have heard
I'm aware of it.
This is not open to the public, but there, not just for sales, but also for rentals, they take the Ajari and you can actually see what properties have actually been rented for.
Okay.
So this is also a good barometer
that
of
gives
what
you
should
good
ask
data for analyzing. I'm sure this portal helps people like you to understand how the market is shaping up.
Correct.
Yeah. Another important point, Mario, was on a tenant side, what are the things you feel a tenant should keep in mind? Let's say if someone has moved new to the country, it's not easier that everyone can get a mortgage that fast or buy a property on cash. So they end up looking at a property, rent it for a few months, and then they make up their mind whether they want to buy something or rent it for a longer period.
Well, like anything, it's a bit like the ability to try before you buy. Renting gives you that flexibility that you can live in an area and see if you can actually settle into the UAE as well. So tenancies tend to be, long-term tenancies tend to be from 6 months onwards. Believe it or not, 6 months is also a long-term tenancy, but most people think a long-term tenancy is a year. So as long as you invest in that year. Now, for a new tenant, a couple of things that they would need to understand. First of all, do not start looking too early.
Okay.
Especially if you're from the UK.
Okay.
Because if you're in the UK, it takes months and months and months to actually get into a property from the first time that you view it. And here it's super fast. And the main reason for that is today, nobody takes up any referencing on the tenant. As long as you have a job and you have a salary certificate and you've got a visa and you pay in the number of checks that has been agreed, you can be in literally in days.
Correct.
As long as all that's in place and the DWA or the air conditioning has been connected, literally 2 or 3 days later, from viewing to moving in can be a few days. Now, this is a concept that is unheard of, especially in the UK, potentially even in Europe, where clearly they take up previous landlords referencing, they take up employers referencing, and these take time. We don't do that here.
I was not aware of that, honestly.
Yeah, as long as you pay your money.
That's like lending money to someone, right? You're giving a house, but it's like lending money.
Well, there are a couple of things now that are coming out of the land department website. So now actually tenants can look up landlords and see what history they have, and landlords can do the same because just because you've paid the money doesn't mean you're a good tenant, and vice versa. So whilst we don't have referencing now, I think slowly these are coming in via the back door, and so eventually the process will probably take a little bit longer than it does right now. So the first thing is it's quick. So that's what I would say. So if you're looking to move in, base that on when are you looking to move in. That's when you should start to look at properties. And there are lots of properties to choose from.
Correct.
But of course, the rental market, just like sale, is expensive. So as long as the budget is there. The other thing to consider it is the responsibility of the tenant to pay the broker's fee, which is typically 5% of the rental, the yearly rental amount plus VAT.
Correct.
Now, what some companies are also doing is that they are giving a minimum fee, and the minimum fee is often 5,000 dirhams plus VAT, or 5% of the rental amount plus VAT, whichever is the greater.
Okay.
So that's something to bear in mind. When you first move in, unless you're having an inventory report done, where literally the inventory clerk notes down every little scratch here, especially if it's fully furnished, items included, from right down to the knives, forks, plates. Unless you've got that, my advice to any person moving is to take extensive photos of the property and the items, which are then date stamped as well, so they can't be doctored.
Okay.
Because when you come to vacate, if you don't have an inventory check in, check out, and the landlord says, oh, there's a scratch here, or this table has got a scratch or a mark or something, try to say it's wear and tear, but most of the time the landlord will say, well, I gave you a brand new table and now you're giving me this, so therefore that's going to cost you X. So it just comes off the deposit. So if you have documentation of everything, especially a photographic documentation, then the whole process is much, much easier. And the last thing to remember is that when you do move in, especially, well, actually, not just especially on an apartment, villas as well, you need a moving in permit.
Okay.
Some people forget that, where you've actually got to go to the developer to say, I'm moving in, therefore there could be wear and tear on the lift. Maybe they might not be allowed to use the passenger lift. It should be a service lift.
And there are timings. I've seen many buildings when I've done loans for people that they allow on certain weekend days that a tenant can only move in on that date. So he can't shift his furniture on a normal day because it impacts a normal, tenant or all lifts.
That's right, and the tenant will have to pay a deposit as well. So to get the permit, there's an amount of money that you have to lodge, which obviously you get back, assuming everything's okay. So these are the things that just come to my mind. I'm sure there are many more.
Correct.
But in this circumstance, I think that should be sufficient.
As you said about this behavioral pattern thing, where they are trying to understand how the tenant has behaved in the past or the landlord. In banking there is a term, know your customer. This looks like know your tenant or know your
KYC,
landlord.
yeah, absolutely.
It's similar to that thought process that you're getting into a new relationship. You want to have a background check on how his past experience has been with previous tenants. So you avoid any friction.
Exactly,
it's like getting into a relationship that you avoid any friction.
100%
That's similar
correct.
to that point.
Yeah.
On the current market scenario, Mario, where do you think it's heading in the current situation in UAE? Is it more properties are rented, or you think more are owner occupied? Or there is no data we could analyze because it keeps on changing?
Yeah, it's a very fluid market.
Correct.
We as agents, I can tell you, we're always scrabbling around trying to get more listings.
Okay.
Whether it's for sale or whether it's for rent. If you don't have listings, you don't have a business.
Yeah.
And some of these landlords and some of these sellers are often saying to the agents that call them or whatever, say, if you want my property, you can have it, but I'm not going to list it properly.
Okay.
So they don't give the paperwork, which is so frustrating from the point of view of the agent, because to do the job properly, and I hope that this platform, if any owner is listening to this, work with your agent. Honestly, I mean, we have to have permits now to advertise. The fake listing, for want of a better word, is also out there because sometimes the owner does not share documentation. And so for me to find a tenant for your property that is available but it's not online, I have to
How do I convince a tenant?
Well, it's very difficult, honestly. And if I had the answer to that, I would just sell it online, because so many agents have got hundreds, perhaps even thousands of what we call pocket listings, which are available, and the owners will deal with them, but you've got to bring the buyer, you've got to bring the tenant.
Okay.
Well, we can't magic that out in the sky. We have to use marketing, and we have to use other portals to maybe feed us these leads that then I might be able to bring this person to another one. And you've got to have a photographic memory. You've got to understand and remember exactly what is available.
Yeah.
So sometimes things fall through the cracks and you end up not doing as much as you should. So my advice would be to owners, please work with your agents. You can give it to up to 3 for sale. In rentals, there is still a loophole open there. You can give it to
multiple people.
You can still give it to multiple. That will be closed by the land department sooner or later.
Yeah.
So pick your 3.
Because it will, to avoid duplication, right?
Yeah, and exactly. But now 20 agents might have it as a pocket listing, so it hasn't actually eradicated the real problem.
Okay.
And because agents are desperate to advertise the fact that they've got stock so that people will then call them up, they also are still involved with, I'm not going to use the word fake listing, but listings that will feed other listings, let's put it that way.
Okay. On last question, just to ask you, on the rental part, this is one of the cities where you can get a property rented at 50,000 and you can get a property rented at 2 million as well. So I'm sure that's correct, or it could be more than 2 million. Do you see it still going up the way market is heading? Because I'm sure the real estate price is not stopping, the appreciation.
Yeah. So if we look at both sales and rentals, I mean, they follow a similar path. All these project launches, they sell out quickly. The sentiment is that Dubai is going up and up and up, and every month is better than the month before.
Correct.
We had, I think it was close to 142 billion dirhams worth of transactions in the last quarter.
Okay.
Now, when you consider that out of those 3 months, so we're talking July, August, and September.
Technically, the holiday months.
July and August are supposed to be quiet, and yet that was the highest we've dealt with. So we are expecting October, November, and December to trounce that again.
Correct.
Which means it does seem as though it's just continually going up. Now, what goes up has to come down. So I think developers are watching this very carefully. They've obviously reduced the size of their units now. Before, when I first came to Dubai in 2008, the units were very big.
Correct.
Now,
it's more compressed.
600-700 is a 1-bedroom, whereas when I was here, it was like 1,000 square feet was a
At least,
1-bedroom.
yeah.
So and I get that to try and keep the price down, or the unit price down. But of course, they're getting less bang for their buck.
Yeah.
So prices are definitely going up.
Yeah.
As a result, the rents are also following suit. However, the rental market is a short-term thing.
Yeah.
When you buy a property, in theory, you've bought it forever until such time as you want to sell it. Now, there is the flipping market, of course, but even that has been delayed. Before, you would buy it today and sell it tomorrow.
Correct.
That's not happening now, because a lot of developers are making sure that 30, 40, perhaps even 50% of the purchase price is paid before the person can sell. So because it is much shorter term, people, what they're doing is they're migrating.
Okay.
So in theory, of course, everybody wants to be on the beach. Everybody wants to have a nice property. But of course, prices have gone up. And therefore, I now have to look at, well, can I afford to live on the beach?
As per my budget.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll find that we're doing this, which is why now the likes of Sharjah, perhaps even Ajman, where rents, when you compare them to Dubai, are so much cheaper, are benefiting from that. But again, sooner or later, those prices are going to go up.
Definitely.
So, I don't think it's going to be able to go up all the time. There will come a limit. But certainly right now, due to the population growth, where new people are coming in, now new residents will tend to probably rent first, at least a bit, unless if they're lucky enough to get some sort of a housing allowance, in which case they should put that towards a mortgage. You will find that will feed the current tenants, but the tenants that they're vacating these properties that the new residents are taking are considering either moving out
or buying a house for themselves, because they see a gap that if they pay an EMI, that makes more suitable.
So the key to all of this is population, and that's steadily growing because Dubai has always done and continues to sell itself amazingly on the world stage. The government transparency, making sure that everybody knows, especially investors, what they're getting into, the golden visa programs, and not just golden visas, what I call the grey visa, the retirement visas. the investor visa, which they lowered it from 1 million to 750. So all of these things is attracting more investment, more people to Dubai, the ease of doing business, the year-round sunshine, the safety, you know, the list goes on and on and on.
Correct.
As to why we should all live in the UAE, if I can put it that way.
Correct.
Now, of course, you will see from the roads how busy the roads are. So we can see from a traffic point of view. I mean, it took me nearly an hour to get here in the studio this afternoon because I knew the rush hour, so I had to allow for that. In the summer, I could have got here in 10 minutes, for example,
Correct.
you know? So all of this is pointing to the fact that Dubai is doing an amazing job. So as long as the population keeps growing, as it would appear to be, then we're going to be on track for the strategy of 2033, 2040 of having, goodness knows, what is it, 5 or 7 million? I can't even keep up with it anymore as to what the target figure is.
Correct.
I understand we're around 3.5 million. I'm not sure if that's exactly correct, but buyers are taking up the slack and tenants are taking up the slack of the rental market through the new people coming in. There will always be the odd listing where the tenant hasn't been found, but then that's just down to price. Landlords, drop your prices. If you haven't rented your property
Correct.
in a few weeks, drop your price. You're asking too much. Same
It's
with
just
sellers.
a self-realization that
Same
they need
with
to have.
sellers.
Yeah.
There are people who want to buy, but buyers won't just buy willy-nilly. They have to
Yeah.
do their research as well. So if your house isn't selling, it's not because your agent's rubbish, although that might have something to do with it. It's because you're asking too much.
That's a fair point to keep in mind when you're renting or selling. Mario, one last thing which came to my mind while we were talking, on the portion of checks to be paid or the breakup a tenant can pay. So ideally what I've seen with my experiences, people pay either twice or people pay in 3 to 4 installments. Every quarter they pay. What do you feel generally is the right? There's no right and wrong, I'm sure.
Sure. Well, what I can tell you is
Yeah.
that last year the norm was paying your rent in 1 to 2 checks.
Correct.
And of course, if you can pay in 1 check, you're able to get a more, dare I say, aggressive discount from the owner, or you can say to the owner, "Can you drop the price a little bit? I'll pay it all in 1 year up front."
Correct.
But none of us get paid a year in advance. We get paid monthly.
Correct.
So what is right? Really, whatever you can afford is right.
Yeah.
But I would personally say that if you are able to get 4 to 6 checks, this I think is very reasonable.
Yeah.
And as rents have gone up, more tenants are looking to maybe ask the owner to be a bit more flexible.
Correct.
On the number of checks that they pay. And this 12 check payments is becoming, I'm not going to say more common, but you're seeing a bit more of them.
It's a regular practice. You feel more and more people are following because it's more flexible, it's more easier to manage, and there's no much bigger hit to the tenant's pocket. Because why is he renting? Because I'm sure he can't buy a house with his savings. So that's why he wants to manage his
raising
cash
the
flow.
deposit perhaps
Correct.
is a struggle. But what some companies are now coming up with is this ability to get the tenant to pay in 12 checks, but pay the landlord in 1 check.
Okay.
And these platforms are slowly starting to come out, which is a win-win for everybody.
So these are like property management companies who would do that, or
Effectively, yes, yeah. I mean, I can't remember the name of the company that does one particular one, but they are
indirectly
definitely
they are
out there.
absorbing the risk, right? So if I have a tenant,
Yeah, but it is the tenant in effect that's actually paying for it, because the interest payments or whatever that the property management company who's paying in 1 check, they're absorbing that purely and simply because if something is worth around 100, let's say for the sake of argument, the tenant is probably paying
110 or
110 or 112 exactly.
Correct.
So they're paying more than they need to,
Correct.
but for the benefit that they can actually
so
pay
that's
on a monthly
additional
basis.
12,000 is what the property management firm is making as a risk that they're taking for that deal.
Or it's the costs, if you like, of loss of interest from paying the landlord in one check. And look, banks have been doing it anyway. They call them these personal loans, where obviously you can pay back the bank in monthly installments, but you're able to take this lump sum, and depending on what the profit rate is. So there are schemes out there, but if we remove those schemes to one side, it's literally just a case that I'm sure with rents going up, that unless the landlord is very, very specific about that certain price, that you can negotiate and actually get a better deal for yourself if you're paying in one check, or if you are wanting to pay in multiple checks, then be prepared to obviously maybe spend a little bit more money on that rent. But if you divide it out, it's actually just a small amount for you, but it's a big amount for the landlord.
It's a big amount for the landlord. Mario, when we were sitting offline, there was one critical point which you explained me on, how a tenant and a landlord should have a relationship. I just want you to repeat that line, because that touched everyone who was listening to you when you were saying that.
So, look, I write for the national newspaper. It's a column called Homefront. I've been doing it now for over 11 years. Yeah. And the one common denominator that comes out is the, dare I say, the inability to get on.
Yeah.
If the landlord and the tenant kind of just gives a little bit either way, and it's very easy to say, look, the law says this. So if we take, for example, rental increases, if the tenant sees the calculator and says, actually, as per the law, the landlord is not entitled to a rental increase.
Okay.
But the difference between a vacant property price, which we discussed earlier, and what the average price is, if it's big, my advice to a tenant would be, look, by law, you don't need to pay more money. But if the landlord wants, let's say 10,000 dirhams more, and the calculator says no increase, look at your figures, look at your budgets. How amazing would it be if you actually said to the landlord, look, Mr. Landlord, as per the law, you are not entitled at all to a rental increase. But you know what? I value our business relationship. I value the fact that I want to be here next year and perhaps the year after. So just like during COVID, most landlords had to suffer, I would say, work your figures out. If you can afford, let's say, 5,000, the landlord wants 10, the landlord wants 10,000, but the law says 0. Just imagine how amazing that would be. If you can afford it, of course, I'm not advocating if you can't. But rather than saying, no, the law says this, therefore, sorry, you're not entitled to anything. Or if the landlord is entitled to an increase, but because he hasn't given you that statutory 90 days, let's say he contacted you on the 85th day, he's missed it by 5 days. Don't be that person. Say, look, you have missed the deadline. Legally, I'm not entitled to give you anything. But you know what? I love living here. I value our relationship, our business relationship. I'm willing to give you this. That is what I would advise any tenant to do with the landlord, because then you are keeping a cordiality. And on the other way, if the tenant is calling you to say there is a leak, don't ghost him. Don't not return. It is your responsibility to actually look after the property, because you have to look after your tenant as well. So be that person. So it comes on both ways. That business relationship, if you can have a cordial business relationship, then when I need your help, I'm more likely to get it if I've also helped you in the past.
It's about being considerate towards each other. That's how it would be a stable...
It's like a marriage, isn't
Correct, yeah. It's like a marriage, how you manage it. So, Mario, thank you. It was really nice having you. I'm sure all our viewers benefit from what we have discussed, and we look forward to more details from you on the national front that you keep on doing regularly.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks
very
a lot,
much.
Mario. Nice having you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm sure you enjoyed today's session. Please follow our YouTube channel, Urban Habitat. Any suggestions, please drop in the comment section wherein you want us to reach out to you. We'll be happy to do the same. Thank you.